Two best friends ambushed by walkers after the end of the world. Hello all, this is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 10th, 11th and 12th episodes of the second season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. Thank you very much for your participation and 600 subscribers. Hopefully we'll keep it up and by the next video we'll have 700 subscribers. Once this video gets 100 likes, I will release the next installment. Enjoy watching it. At the abandoned public works station, where Rick and Shane flee from attacking walkers, Shane barricades himself in a school bus as walkers bang against the door. Nearby, a bound Randall crawls toward a knife on the ground. Earlier, Rick and Shane drive down a country road. Rick stops the car short of their destination, 18 miles away from the farm, to confront Shane. Rick knows what happened with Otis, and he knows about Shane's affair with Lori. Rick asks Shane if he believes Rick is unable to keep his family safe. Shane counters he knows Lori's baby is his and will do anything to ensure they are safe. Rick opens the SUV to check on Randall, who's bound, gagged and blindfolded in the trunk. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, Maggie confesses to Lori that Glenn lost confidence after the shootout at the bar. Lori advises that Glenn should man up and be stronger. Maggie attempts to leave to give Beth her lunch, but Lori insists that she'd do it instead. Back on the road, Rick makes plans for the coming winter, explaining that they have to conserve ammunition and stockpile food. Shane listens passively, staring out the window at a lone walker ambling through a field. At the farm, Lori brings Beth a tray of food. Rick drives past the 18-mile mark, looking to leave Randall somewhere he'll have a chance. He pulls up to a public works station surrounded by a fence. A walker in a police uniform approaches. Shane draws his gun, but Rick stops him. Rick cuts his finger and wipes blood on the fence. When the walker presses his face against it, Rick stabs it in the head and tells Shane that while it may be easy to use a gun, it is better to not use them. A second walker in uniform approaches, and Shane stabs it in the head. Later, Rick siphons gas as Shane examines the policemen's bodies, noting they haven't been bitten. Rick points to scratches that likely caused their transformation. Meanwhile, Lori collects Beth's lunch, which hasn't been touched. Down in the kitchen, as Lori clears Beth's tray, she notices the knife is missing. She confronts Beth, who pulls it from under the covers and hands it over. Rick and Shane drag Randall to the pavement. Rick drops a knife on the ground as he and Shane walk away. Randall begs them not to abandon him, trying to explain he's a normal guy and he even went to school with Maggie. Rick and Shane freeze and realize that this means Randall will know where the farm is. Shane prepares to execute him, but is tackled by Rick. He argues he needs time to think about what to do. Shane counters that Randall could lead his people to the farm and accuses Rick of putting Lori and Carl in danger by sparing Randall. The two begin brawling. Randall, meanwhile, crawls toward the knife. Shane topples a motorcycle onto Rick, briefly trapping him. He goes to Randall and aims his gun, but Rick gets out of the motorcycle and tackles Shane before he can fire. When Rick gains the upper hand, an enraged Shane grabs a wrench and hurls it at Rick. Rick dodges the wrench, but it goes through a building window which causes dozens of walkers to begin pouring out through the broken window. Shane flees the onslaught. A walker approaches Randall, who cuts himself free just in time to kill it. Rick empties his gun as walkers pile on top of him. At the farm, Maggie scolds Beth for considering suicide. Lori and Andrea listen in from the kitchen. Andrea tells Lori she shouldn't have taken the knife away and that Beth has the right to choose if she wants to live or not. Lori counters that Andrea got through her own death wish by shirking her chores. Andrea accuses Lori of taking her blessings for granted as she's had an affair with Shane, got reunited with Rick, and had Carl saved while others have suffered. Meanwhile, Beth tries to convince Maggie that they should kill themselves. Andrea enters the room, offering to watch Beth while Maggie gets some air. At the public works station, Shane barricades himself in a school bus against the walkers. Rick finds Randall and drags him to the SUV. From the school bus, Shane watches as his partner abandons him. Rick goes and takes the handguns off the two dead policemen. Unguarded, Beth locks herself in the bathroom and smashes the mirror. Lori pries open the door, but not before Beth has cut her wrist. In the bus, Shane is losing ground to the walkers when the SUV bursts through a nearby gate. As Randall drives, Rick leans out the window shooting walkers. Shane runs to the back of the bus and dives into the SUV. Andrea runs to the farmhouse after Beth's attempted suicide. Lori reports that Beth didn't cut herself deeply. Andrea takes it as Beth wanting to live, but Maggie disagrees in anger and tells Andrea never to set foot near her or the house again. Back on the road, Rick and Shane restrain Randall and toss him in the trunk. Alone, Rick admits he'll likely kill Randall, but he's still going to think it over. Rick tells Shane that if he wants to stay with them, he has to obey Rick as the leader as he returns Shane's gun to him. As Shane mulls over what he says, he stares out the window at a lone walker shambling through an overgrown field. In the farm slaughter shed, Daryl interrogates and beats up bound Randall. Randall confesses that he was traveling with a heavily armed group of 30. The men, he says, have raped women before. Still, Randall insists, "I ain't like that." Daryl reports back to the rest of the group. Rick declares Randall a threat and that he must be killed. "You can't just decide on your own to take someone's life," Dale objects, begging Rick to give him time to talk to the group and find another way. Rick agrees to give Dale the rest of the day. Dale asks Andrea to guard Randall against Shane while he talks to the others. He asks if Andrea agrees that Randall should be killed. "The world we knew is gone," Dale argues, "but keeping our humanity? That's a choice." Andrea agrees to watch Randall, "but not because I think you're right," she says. From inside the slaughter shed, Randall overhears Shane approaching with Carl. Carl is curious about the prisoner, but Shane insists he let the grown-ups handle it. Shane asks Andrea, who's standing guard outside, if she would stop him if he were to try to shoot Randall. She insists she would. Shane shares his suspicion that Rick won't be able to go through with the execution. Meanwhile, Carl watches Randall from the rafters of the slaughter shed. Randall notices him. "I didn't do nothing," Randall tells Carl, begging to be set free. Carl slowly starts walking toward Randall, but is halted when Shane enters. Shane shoves a gun in Randall's face and drags Carl out of the shed. "Quit trying to get yourself killed," Shane scolds. Dale approaches Daryl about Randall. "This group's broken," Daryl says, stating he doesn't care what happens either way. Dale asks Daryl to stand with him anyway, but Daryl won't. Lori finds Rick tying a noose in the barn. He asks if she supports his decision. "If you think it's best," she says, asking about what happened on the road with Shane. "He won't be a problem anymore," Rick answers. Carl is kneeling by Sophia's grave when Carol approaches. "They'll see Sophia in heaven," she tells him. Carl snaps back that heaven is just another lie, and if you believe it, you're an idiot. Later, Rick chastises Carl for talking back to Carol. Dale goes to Herschel, asking for his support. "I don't want to know," Herschel insists. "I leave it with Rick." Carl wanders into Daryl's camp and finds a handgun stashed in Daryl's motorcycle saddlebag. He pockets it and heads into the forest. Carl stumbles upon a walker stuck in the mud of a creek bed. Fascinated, he begins throwing rocks at the walker, then approaches to shoot it with Daryl's gun. The walker lunges at Carl, eventually freeing itself from the mud and grabbing onto Carl's leg. Carl falls to the ground but manages to get away. Dale, meanwhile, tries to convince Shane to spare Randall. Shane gives Dale credit for the effort and says that if Dale convinces the others, he'll go along with it. "But I'm telling you now," Shane warns, "you're wrong." In the farmhouse, Glenn finds Herschel checking up on Beth. Herschel asks Glenn about his family and tells him about his own Irish heritage. He hands Glenn a pocket watch that belonged to his grandfather. As the sun sets, Rick again asks Lori if she thinks he's doing the right thing. Lori nods. The group gathers in the house. Rick asks if anyone thinks Randall should be spared. Dale posits that the only people who think so are himself and Glenn, but Glenn too sides with Rick. "He's not one of us," Glenn offers. Dale begs to give Randall a chance to prove himself, but the others insist they wouldn't feel safe with him around camp. "If we do this," Dale says, "we're saying there's no hope." Dale pleads with the group to do what's right. Andrea eventually sides with him, but the others stay silent. Despondent, Dale leaves the room. "This group is broken," he says, echoing Daryl. Afterward, Rick, Shane, and Daryl bring Randall to the barn and put him on his knees. Rick asks if he has any final words. Randall cries, begging for his life. As Rick raises his gun, Carl enters the barn. "Do it, Dad," he says. Shocked, Rick lowers his gun and orders Randall taken away. Shane storms out of the barn. Rick brings Carl back to the camp and tells Lori what happened. He wanted to watch, Rick says. "I couldn't." Meanwhile, Dale walks through the fields. He hears the moans of a dying cow and goes to investigate. The cow had been gutted. He turns and is attacked by the same walker that Carl found in the creek bed. Back at camp, the others hear Dale's screams. Daryl runs to the scene, where the walker is on top of Dale, tearing into his stomach. Daryl stabs the walker in the head, then shouts for help. Dale is severely injured, his intestines have been exposed. He goes into shock. Rick and the group arrive at Dale's side and are devastated at Dale's injuries. When Herschel arrives, he reports that Dale can't be saved. As Dale writhes on the ground, Carl sees the body of the walker he was throwing rocks at previously lying nearby. Horrified, he buries his head in Lori's lap. Andrea begs Rick to help Dale. Rick unholsters his gun, but since he had yet to shoot, an unarmed man not in self-defense can't bring himself to shoot. Daryl takes the weapon and aims it at Dale's head. Dale gives him a faint but reassuring smile before lighting his head up, giving him permission to end his torment. "Sorry, brother," Daryl says sadly and fires. The group holds a funeral for Dale. Afterwards, Rick announces that they are going to prove him wrong by showing the group can still work together. Herschel permits all but Shane to move into his house due to Shane's antagonistic behavior. Rick plans for himself and Daryl to bring Randall out to a nearby town and leave him there. Carl, feeling guilty about Dale's death, goes to Shane and tells him about how he knew of the walker and that he stole a pistol from Daryl's bike. Lori tries to talk to Shane and apologizes for what she was doing to him, prompting him to tell Rick about Carl's confession. Rick declares his main concern is disposing of Randall, but talks to Carl and encourages him to keep hold of the gun, as they no longer can live without taking action. Shane goes into the barn and watches Randall, discovering that he was trying to slip out of his restraints. When Rick and Daryl prepare to leave, T-Dog is sent to get Randall. He discovers the barn empty. Shane has brought Randall into the forest, informing him that he is done with Rick's group and wants to join with the others. This is merely a ruse as Shane breaks Randall's neck, killing him, and strikes his own face into a tree to make it seem he was assaulted by Randall. A thorough search of the farm shows no sign of Randall. Shane buries his gun and shouts to the group that Randall escaped and is armed. Rick assembles Glenn and Daryl to go with him, and Shane to track him down. Glenn and Daryl come across where Randall was last seen, and the area shows signs of a struggle. A walker appears, and they take cover behind some trees. The walker is Randall and tries to attack them, but Glenn impales a machete into his head, killing him. An examination of the body showed no sign of bites or scratches, and that his cause of death was his neck being broken. Rick picks apart Shane's story and comes to the conclusion this was a ruse to lure him out into the field, where Shane would kill him. Shane tells Rick he is a better father than he is, and that him returning only messed things up. Rick makes it seem as though he's handing Shane his weapon, as he refused to raise his gun at him. Once his gun is in Shane's hand, Rick pulls out his knife and stabs him, saying that he had brought this on himself as Shane then dies. Realizing what he had done, Rick becomes distraught and sobs. As he tries to cope with what happened, Carl appears, shocked to see Shane dead. He apparently aims his gun at Rick, but is actually aiming at the reanimated Shane behind him. Carl pulls the trigger, killing Shane. Rick approaches Shane's body, weeping. As they examine Shane's body, they are unaware of the massive horde approaching on the horizon. The end of the 10th, 11th and 12th episodes. As soon as this video gets 100 likes and 10 comments, I'm releasing the sequel.